going to give a little bit of information, a little bit more of an in-depth look in this video on how to use the 3 appeals to help you to improve your analysis in your rhetorical analysis essays. There's a lot of information in this PowerPoint. I'm going to blow through a couple slides. A good thing for you to do is to just pause the video if you want to take some notes on some of the things that I have in the slides. Otherwise, this video might take a while. I'm going to spend most of my time explaining some of the paragraphs and the explanations that I've written to give you a sense for how you can use these. So we're going to start with ethos, the ethical appeal. Just as an overview, ethos is really about the speaker's reputation and credibility and the audience's ability to trust the speaker. There's a couple things to look for if you're trying to find something that appeals to ethos. There's a couple ways that you can talk about ethos. The 2 ways that I'm going to be showing you in my example are emphasizing the speaker's shared values and beliefs with the audience. So that creates a sense of community or collective experience. It's the I'm just like you or we're in this together trick. I'm also going to talk about discussing the reputation the speaker might have in his or her profession that would impress readers, because I've decided that it enhances or comes through in the evidence that I'm analyzing. So here's my exemplar. I'm taking this from the "We Should Let Children Get Bored" article that I posted a couple weeks ago. And this is the part where the writer is discussing how some of the most boring jobs that she's had were also the most creative. She says, "My mind had no choice but to drift into an elaborate fantasy realm. It's when you're bored that the stories set in. Checking out groceries at the supermarket, I invented narratives around people's purchases." You might recognize this from the "How to Write a Rhetorical Analysis" paragraph video that I wrote. And I did kind of steal some stuff from that paragraph too, but I want to focus on ethos here. So the first thing that I do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the first thing because it's not really like explaining the quote, it's jumping right in with her reputation. So Paul is the writer. Her position as a writer and editor for the New York Times lends credibility to her personal experience. So she's sharing her experience, and I want to talk about the fact that that experience is really valuable because she's a published writer. She's clearly benefited from her own experience of boredom, which may convince readers that boredom is a valuable, almost natural tool to develop creativity. Then I'm going to kind of push it into what is the audience's experience? How is this really going to connect with them? Because it's one thing to be impressed with somebody and to say, oh, well, maybe their experience is legit, but then it takes it to another level if that person can take you to their level and make you feel kind of equal. So I say, perhaps they can imagine a time in their own lives when they too had to keep themselves busy, putting them on equal footing with a seasoned creative person. Paul's assessment encourages them to see their own boredom in a new light, where the stories that set in could have been the seeds of a life of creativity. It might be too late for them, but perhaps these seeds could develop into creative careers for their own children. So you'll notice that I'm talking about how the audience is really going to feel connected, because it's like, oh man, I actually had those experiences too. I wonder, could that have been something that could have benefited me that maybe I didn't take advantage of enough? And so when you're putting yourself on the same footing as the speaker, then it kind of empowers the audience. And I'm really kind of showing that when I'm talking about how that assessment encourages them to see their own boredom in a new light. And I'm always going to connect back to that claim that we should let children get bored again, which is why I started talking about the kids at the end, because I want to bring it back always to that purpose. Did you notice that I did not say the word ethos at all in this paragraph? I don't have to, because ethos and pathos and logos are really just ways of thinking about how things are persuasive. We don't have to use those words at all. They're just concepts that we can use to kind of explore different ideas. So let's move on to logos. No, sorry, pathos. That's the emotional appeal. These are the tools the speaker uses to activate emotions. And this is what the audience feels, their emotional response. Here's a couple things to look for. And in my paragraph, I'm going to discuss the emotional impact of particular words and phrases. And I'm also going to discuss the emotions an audience is likely to feel about a given situation, particularly when it comes to expectations, values, and beliefs. So here's my example. I took this one from Silent Spring. We got the strange stillness, The birds, where had they gone? Many people spoke of them, puzzled and disturbed. The feeding stations in the backyards were deserted. The few birds seen anywhere were moribund. Moribund means like on the edge of death. They trembled violently and could not fly. It was spring without voices. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, oh my goodness, those poor little birds, this is devastating. Like, I'm really feeling this. It's like really sad. So what I'm kind of doing in this paragraph is I'm thinking about my own reaction, and I'm trying to kind of explain that as a way of getting into what an audience might think. So I'm pulling out words and phrases right off the bat. Words like strange stillness and deserted create a sense of desolation and emptiness that would go against the average American's hope and expectation associated with spring. So I'm talking about their experience. I'm talking about some of their values and beliefs here. And I'm saying what the author is writing, those words have an emotion and an idea that's completely opposite what we associate with spring. At the same time, Paul creates an even more chilling effect when she describes the birds who, quote, trembled violently and could not fly. Those poor little birds, oh my goodness. Birds commonly symbolize freedom and hope. So I'm trying to make this a little bit more logical. I'm trying to explain how this whole like, oh, the poor birds and oh, the desolation is really gonna push people to think about the environmental impact. So it commonly symbolized hope and freedom. So that was me kind of thinking through, like, why am I feeling so bad for birds? And what's the bigger idea that this is connecting to? So the freedom and hope. And it's suggesting that these creatures are in the throes of death, suggests that these precious American values are threatened too. So I'm trying to kind of expand it out a little bit more. And I probably could have explained and gone a little bit deeper in my analysis. If you've noticed, I haven't really connected back to the claim in this. So this is a really short commentary, really talking about how it's connecting to the audience. I would definitely, at the end of this, talk about how this convinces people that we need to do something about chemicals in the environment. Okay, moving on to logos, the logical appeal. So where ethos and pathos, ethos was about the speaker, pathos was about the audience, logos is really all about the argument itself. What is the reasoning and the logic that the speaker uses? Here's a couple things to look for. In my paragraph, I'm going to be discussing what makes the strategy logical. Why would this make sense to the audience? And I'm also going to try to explain why the audience would be convinced. But there's other things that you can talk about too. You can pause and take a look at these. Here's my exemplar. I'm quoting this one also from the Why We Should Let Children Get Bored. In an interview with GQ magazine, Lin-Manuel Miranda credited his unattended afternoons with fostering inspiration, because there is nothing better to spur creativity than a blank page or an empty bedroom, he said. So our writer, her last name is Paul, she is quoting a very famous playwright, right, as a source to prove that children should be allowed to get bored. So Miranda has a very well-known reputation. So I immediately took this as an example of logos, something that's really going to reach out to the average American New York Times reader. So that's what I'm going to be discussing. The average American, especially one who regularly reads the New York Times, would be well aware of Lin-Manuel Miranda's enormous success as the writer of the Broadway hit Hamilton. Including his perspective about the value of boredom is highly convincing, given his reputation for creativity and innovation. So I'm telling you, here's why the source that Paul is using is credible. Look at his reputation. It's a logical source to use. If Lin-Manuel Miranda thrived on boredom and arguably became famous using the skills it helped him develop, then it stands to reason that children today, though they may not become famous, certainly won't be damaged by a similar experience. So you'll notice I'm trying to take the perspective of the audience. Why would this guy be somebody that they would pay attention to as a source? And I'm also trying to show my readers what the thought process would be. So in this second part, this is where I'm really trying to explain what would be logical about it. In the earlier part, I'm kind of talking about that audience connection. So I hope that this is helpful to you. I hope that these examples kind of give you some options and some opportunities to really improve and to think about new ways that you could incorporate ethos, pathos, and logos. Remember, we don't have to say them. We can use them as a lens to view our quotes or our evidence, and we can use that as a way to discuss some of the strategies and what makes them convincing.